We are going live in just a couple of seconds. It's loading. There we go. All right. Okay, make sure I close that window. All right. Okay. So, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Ravina Nivalkar, and I'm the Executive Director at NAMI Santa Clara County. Before we begin with tonight's presentation, I'm going to go over some of the NAMI Santa Clara County's updates. Our helpline is up and running from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday by phone as well as email. We have walk-in hours from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. After our family support is available on evenings and weekends. Our support groups are all listed on our website. Our website is namisantaclara.org. Our educational classes, such as family to family, familiar to familiar, persona to persona, peer-to-peer, provider education, you can contact the helpline number, which is 408-453-0400 and select option 1 for further details. Our NAMI Basics is on demand and on our website, and you can take it at your own pace. And so is NAMI Homefront. Our next FaithNet MH 101 is on November 16th. Our community peer program continues to match by hospitals as well as referrals. So if you need more information, do reach us out on our helpline number. And our NAMI Walk Silicon Valley just took place this past Saturday on October 7th. And it was a great event. We had a great turnout. About 830 people had registered, and we have raised over $253,000. Our goal is $280,000, and our fundraiser is open until December 7th. So please continue to fundraise until then. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Okay, so now before we go ahead with the topic for tonight, I'm going to invite Egil Narvik, I hope I pronounced it correctly, to say a few words. I think Egil is going to be speaking about, Egil is from the county, and I'm going to hand it over to Egil to take over from here.
All right. So almost, Rovina. It's Agle Narvik.
Okay.
Yeah. And I am one of the program managers with the Behavioral Health Services Department in Santa Clara County. I oversee several programs, and assisted outpatient treatment is the topic that we will review briefly today, and also known as Laura's Law. And some of you may have heard me speak about it already. I did several presentations to the community when we launched last year in February. So I'm trying to not repeat myself too much. Can I share my screen, Rovina? Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. So for those of us who are visual learners, this might be helpful. Now, please do not let me speak, and if slides do not move forward, just let me know. I once did a presentation when everybody was too shy to let me know that something got stuck. So I'm now moving to the second slide. Can I have a sign from you, Rovina, that it's actually switched? Yeah? Okay,
no,
great.
It's not.
It's not.
Yeah, it's still on the first slide.
Huh. Okay, I'm going to stop share then, and I'm going to share again, and I'm not going to go into presentation mode because I think that is what the problem might be. Okay. Sorry about that. Let me do this again. Here we go. How about now? Are the slides changing?
Yeah, I can see the first slide right now.
Okay, so assisted outpatient treatment. For those of you who may need to, who cannot listen to the whole 10 minutes, one thing that is important to remember is our inbox, and the best way to reach us for any questions or making a referral for your loved one is at the aot@hhs.scc.gov.org. And I'll show you also how to find this on our website. Okay, so assisted outpatient treatment is also known as Laura's Law. And it is a form of civil commitment for individuals who have severe mental illness and for whatever reason are not able to engage with treatment in the community. So it could be that, in a voluntary way. So it could be that they don't have awareness of the problem and they continue experiencing severe symptoms and declining and not engaging in treatment. Or it could be that they have an extreme denial, and just unwillingness to adhere to any kind of treatment. In Santa Clara County, we can engage enroll individuals in AOT treatment in a voluntary as well as involuntary fashion. And when it is involuntary, it means that a petition is submitted and we are going to the judge, and the judge is issuing a court order for the individual to attend outpatient treatment. So, and we'll talk more about it, what it means. But one of the things that kind of stands this program apart from other programs in Santa Clara County, where, that are funded by Medi-Cal, is that family members can make AOT referral. We do not need a consent from the individual because they are very resistant to engage in treatment. We accept referrals from the third party, and family members are one of them. Okay. Moving on to the next slide, right? It moved?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what is AOT petition and AOT court order? What can we do and what we cannot do? So again, civil commitment process. Therefore, a proceeding is confidential, and the individual that is being brought to the hearing has due process rights, a legal representation, the right to appeal, and many other rights to protect them. On the other hand, we also offer opportunity to engage voluntarily at every step. So in fact, half of the petitions that we submitted ended up not with a court order, but with a settlement agreement. That means that the petition has been submitted, the judge is reviewing the progress of this person, but this person is attending treatment and engaging in treatment of their own volition because they reached a settlement agreement and they were not court ordered. It's very similar to kind of like having court order, but it does make people feel a little bit better, to not be involuntarily committed. And another thing to remember is that non-compliance will not result in arrest or incarceration because this is not a criminal court. This is a civil commitment process. So even though it is a court order, that court order cannot include a mandate to take medication. That right remains with the individual. And I know some people are very happy about that, and some people are very upset about that, because sometimes the main issue is that your loved one is not taking medication, and it seems if they only could take medication, they would get better. But because this is an outpatient treatment, we cannot mandate medication, and we cannot administer medication involuntarily. That type of medication administration can only be done in inpatient setting, in a hospital or other residential inpatient setting. So what can we do if the person is under court order to engage in treatment and yet is still not compliant? One of the things that we're allowed to do is to continue outreach and engagement and offer any other services that they might accept. In other Medi-Cal programs, you might know a lot of times if the individual is not engaging for 30 days or 60 days, sometimes 90 days, they are under the mandate to discharge and open that slot to the next person. In this program, we have the mandate to continue outreach in almost unlimited way. So we continue outreaching, engaging, And we offer services such as, housing, food, whatnot, even if they don't agree to see a physician, for example. Another way that we try to encourage adherence and compliance is by having more frequent court hearings. And that's kind of to capitalize on this black robe effect. We're hoping that, if people show up in front of the judge more times and they kind of get it, oh, that's serious, maybe I should do something about it. And other counties who implemented this way before us have noticed that it does have an effect and it works somewhat, not in all of the cases. And then, of course, we continue monitoring for safety, even if the individual is not compliant under the court order. And we continue evaluating for the need to inpatient commitment, basically to initiate 5150 process where an individual is transported against their will, usually to an emergency psychiatric services to be evaluated for potentially being admitted. So that's what we can do and cannot do. How can you reach us? There are two ways of seeking an AOT petition or AOT referral for your loved one. One is to call a call center, but not to speak to the representative of the call center, but to select the option number 3, and that will take you directly to an AOT triage staff. We do our best to try to have at least one staff member available to answer the phones. But if that doesn't happen, leave a message, always leave a message. They do return their calls pretty diligently, as far as I know. So again, call center, general number, and option number 3. Just listen to the menu and select option number 3 when it comes up. And another way, and probably actually the best way and the easiest way for those who have easy access to internet and a device, is to fill out an AOT referral form and email it to the AOT inbox. So let me show you how it looks like on our website, because that's where you can access all this information. So this is a screenshot of Behavioral Health Services Department website AOT page. I can never remember any URLs or web page addresses. The way I find this one is I type into the search engine, right where you would type any kind of address. I type Santa Clara County Behavioral Health, and then our general page comes up. And in that general page, you will find the oops, I have to move it. Okay, here, programs and services button. Under that button, if you scroll down, there's going to be assisted outpatient treatment, AOT. And in this page, you have all the helpful links. You have the AOT referral form, which is a fillable PDF form, but not an online submission form. So one thing to remember is if you need to fill out this form, first save it to your device so you don't lose the data, because you will not get a submission button at the end after filling everything out. So this is something that you get to keep. It's the form that will be saved on your device. You will complete it, and then you will email it to aot@hhs.sccgov.org. So this is our address again, posted right here on the website, very easy to find. The AOT eligibility criteria are listed on this page as well. I didn't go into detail here today because I know we have limited time, and who can request a petition. But the most important thing to remember is that family members can. And if you don't know how or what to do and unclear about the form, either call us or even just email us to the AOT inbox and somebody will reach out back. Any questions? I'm not sure if the questions are supposed to come in the chat, or can people unmute themselves and speak? My first time with this audience here, so.
There's this question in the chat. I think there's one question that says, what does AOT stand for?
Oh, okay, I see it now. Okay, it's assisted outpatient treatment. And the word assisted basically indicates that they're court order assisted, right? So they're not, it's just kind of a nicer way to say court-ordered outpatient treatment. If you want to research more about what legislature had to say about it and how the law looks like, it's called Laura's Law, and it has been updated recently. There are several, publications about it. That if you search up Laura's Law, you'll find a lot. And I know NAMI provided a pretty good analysis of it too in the day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Looks like there are no other questions. So thank you so much.
All right.
Egle, right? Egle, did I say it right?
Yeah, you got it.
Oh,
yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and doing this quick presentation. I think AOT is a really important program and really glad that we have it in Santa Clara County. I just see one quick question here. It says, is it eligible for Medi-Cal patients only?
Very good question. At this time, we're open to all. So I know many other counties, they started with Medi-Cal and private insurances and all health insurance plans, and then eventually it ended up being Medi-Cal only. We have been through to this and we are open to all. So even if the person has a private health insurance plan, they can seek this service. You can seek the service on behalf of them. If they seek the service themselves, that means that they are willing and engaging and they don't need a court order, so they wouldn't qualify. They wouldn't meet the eligibility criteria, right? But if they need somebody else, as a third party, to refer them to this service because they don't recognize that they need it, we will take a private insurance client as well. We will not be able to bill the insurance. So it's not going to come out, it's going to come out of the county funds. And the challenge with this is always that is the step down options, so to speak, is that when the person no longer qualifies for being in this civil commitment program and they need to get slightly lower level of care, then we need to work with the plan on finding out, what other services they can provide. And a lot of times then that falls through the cracks a little bit. So my advice would be to really work with the health insurance plan on understanding what will this person be coming back to and have that plan ready.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you so much again for joining us tonight. And thanks for the quick presentation. I think this has been really helpful. So thanks for coming.
Anytime. Let me know if you need me to come back or email me the questions and I'll answer.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye. All right. Moving on. Our topic for tonight's general meeting is the science of nutrition. And we have Dr. Hummel here, is a nutritionist, health educator, author, international speaker, and former engineer. She holds multiple degrees, which include the bachelor's in engineering from Cal Poly, a master's of science in nutrition from University of Bridgeport, Connecticut, a master's in public health from San Jose State University, a certification in plant-based nutrition from the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies at Cornell University. And she holds a doctorate in naturopathy as well as a doctorate in philosophy in natural medicine from the International Institute of Origin Medicine. Wow, you've done a lot of studying. So welcome to our general meeting, and I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can share your screen. And I'm going to go offline. But I'll be around if you have any questions for me.
Thank you so much, Ravina, and I'm so honored to be invited to participate in this Zoom meeting. I am a big supporter of NAMI. I am someone who has dealt with mental health issues in my own family, so I am a big supporter. And I'm also very aware of the impacts of nutrition and the brain. Therefore, me doing this presentation is a great honor, and it's just a big pleasure for me to be able to hopefully share information that I'm hoping will be not only good information, but also be hopefully motivational, so that people who are in the audience will feel motivated to eat a healthy diet. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So give me a minute to just adjust it so that you can see my slides properly. So I'm going to start, and let me just use presenter's view. There we go. Okay, so the title of my presentation is Nutrition and the Brain. And well, she already said who I am, so I don't have to. Well, let me just say that I'm a nutritionist. So my first master's was in nutrition. That's my passion. It's been for a long time to study nutrition, to teach nutrition. I worked as a clinical nutritionist. And to this day, I still do education mostly about nutrition as well as lifestyle. I'm certified in lifestyle medicine. I work for an organization called Eat for the Earth. We promote a healthy diet, not just for the body, our own health, but also for planetary health, the health of all creatures. And I run a program called Community RX in Santa Cruz County. We are funded by the County of Santa Cruz, and we actually give people a healthy diet for 10 days. We just finished around this Sunday, and we always see amazing results of people who really commit to eating a healthy diet for only 10 days. And they see amazing transformations in some of their risk factors. So anyway, I'm very passionate about this, about nutrition and health in general. But today I'm going to talk about something particular, because not everybody thinks about the brain and nutrition in the same sentence. Like, what does nutrition have to do with the brain? We many times think that things that have to do with mental health have absolutely nothing to do with nutrition, and we'll find out that that's not necessarily true. But let me just say, just to get started here, about the brain. The brain is just a marvelous machine. I don't know if any of you in the audience have ever had the chance that I had recently to actually hold a human brain in your hands. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but sometimes when you study anatomy, you are given the chance to see parts of human, organs. In the brain, I just had the chance one time to just hold it in my hand in an anatomy lab. And it was just an amazing experience. And let me tell you, the brain is considered one of the most complex structures in the universe. You probably know that there's cells, specialized cells in the nervous system and in the brain, and these are called neurons. And of course, our body is made up of trillions of cells. And in the brain alone, we have about 100 billion, with a B, neurons. But that's not the whole of it, because each neuron is connected to other neurons by hundreds, sometimes thousands of connections. And these connections are what makes the brain work. There's an estimate, of course, nobody's counted this. There's an estimation that there's about 100 trillion connections between these neurons in the brain. So it's a very complex structure. In fact, think about this. Each one of our brains is much, much, much more complex than the most advanced computer on planet Earth. So you can think about the most advanced computer with the most computer power you can ever think of, and your brain is able to do more than that. Computers can specialize sometimes in one thing and do one thing better than humans, but our brain does so much stuff, and we are not even aware of a lot of the stuff that our brain is doing in our body, like adjusting our breathing, our heart rate, and all these internal organs that we're not thinking about. So the brain is just, I'm moving my hands and my brain is doing that. There's just so many things. We take it so much for granted. So with such a complex structure, obviously there's chances of things going wrong. It's a delicate structure, so things can go wrong. So today I'm going to talk about how nutrition can both do good things and bad things to the brain. And I'm going to start off with the bad news because I want to end with a good note. So I'm going to give you the bad news at the beginning so that at the end you have some hope. And also, I want to say something real quick before we get into the more mental health aspect of the presentation. I want to just mention briefly that there's not just mental health things to do with nutrition, but also there's other types of conditions that have to do with the brain as well. These are neurodegenerative conditions. So if you think about things as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, dementia. These are neurodegenerative. And I just want to mention briefly, just so that you know, okay? So if you're curious about this, this might be something interesting. There is evidence that what we eat, so our nutrition, you know, the composition of our diet can also affect the neurodegenerative disease risk. So I just want to briefly mention before we get into the mental health aspect. So let me just show you, by the way, everything that I'm going to present to you today is evidence-based. I don't just talk about this from my own opinions. I like to present the evidence. I like to show you the studies where these things come from. And if you're interested, you can go back, because I think this is being recorded, and you can look up those studies, read them yourself if you're so interested or so inclined. But I want to give you the evidence. It's all evidence-based. I think that's important. So let me just show you, for instance, a few examples of how foods can affect the brain in positive or negative ways. I'm going to start off with bad news, like I said. So for instance, let me just give you an example. This study from the European Journal of Epidemiology is talking about dairy foods. And we usually think of dairy foods in the context of calcium and protein and these very important nutrients that we need. But yet, interesting to note, let me just briefly say that there's also some risk factors associated with dairy foods, particularly, and the risk for Parkinson's disease. In this study, it was done, this risk factor was found in men. So we could maybe potentially generalize it to men and women, but just so be aware that this was found in men in this particular study. And it found that consumption of dairy foods increases the risk for Parkinson's disease. And you're probably like, what? I never thought that. Like, why would that happen? The reason, if you have time to read more about this, and there's other studies, this isn't the only one, but the reason, I'm just going to mention briefly, there's a few things that are thought to be playing a part here. Number one is the fact that there's saturated fat in dairy products. And as you probably know, saturated fat puts us at a higher risk for other things, such as cardiovascular disease, possibly even things, metabolic diseases, such as type 2 diabetes. So saturated fat is thought to be one of the least healthy fats we can eat. So saturated fat may be one factor, but other things to keep in mind is the fact that today we live in an industrialized system where our foods come from industrialized farming methods that are used for growing our food. And the fact that a lot of chemicals, such as fertilizers and other chemicals are used in our food, these tend to get stored in animal fat. So when we consume a lot of animal fat, we tend to get exposure to some of these chemicals. And they have found in some studies that people who have Parkinson's disease, when they do the actual autopsy studies, they have found that they tend to have higher levels of some of these chemicals. So that's something I wanted to mention briefly. The other thing that I want to mention briefly is Alzheimer's disease. That's another neurodegenerative disease. And what I'm going to say right now comes mainly from this book that I highly recommend. It's from a couple who are both neurologists, MD neurologists. They both work doing research as well as seeing patients. And it's amazing because some of this is more of a compilation of some of the very recent research that has found, and it's been changed. This more recent research has been changing the concept of how Alzheimer's develops. So it's starting to develop, the thinking is starting to develop that Alzheimer's is actually maybe more of a vascular disease than it used to be thought of, maybe more of a genetic disease. And right here, doctors Dean and Haisha Herzai say that about 90% of Alzheimer's cases can be indeed prevented because it's not necessarily a purely genetic disease. It has to do with our lifestyle. And I do like this summary here. There is hope. There's a way to prevent cognitive decline, slow its progression, and importantly, improve the quality of life of those who have already a diagnosis. So even it's not thought to be something that can be reversed, but for sure, it's possible to improve the quality of life of individuals who have already been diagnosed and possibly slow down the progression of this disease. So I'm going to show you a couple of things that come straight from the book. This is risk factors for Alzheimer's. So as you can see right here in the center, we see the brain, and there's 4 main factors: oxidation, inflammation, glucose dysregulation. So you're probably now thinking, does this have to do with diabetes or anything like that? Glucose, diabetes, pre-diabetes. In lipid, you might have heard this name, this word in the context of maybe cholesterol or heart disease. And sure enough, when we talk about lipids, we're thinking about things such as cholesterol, bad cholesterol, triglycerides. Those are usually the lipids that we test in individuals because they do put us at a higher risk for cardiovascular disease. But you see how these things have to do with the brain as well, and they affect the brain. And in the outer perimeter of this circle, we see then those lifestyle habits that can affect these risk factors, such as a poor diet with high sugar or high saturated fat, the diabetes, the high cholesterol. But look, other things as well, such as stress. Interestingly enough, poor sleep, head trauma, that's something that maybe we can't do much about, but a lot of the other things are definitely under our control, such as sedentary behavior and smoking and alcohol and obesity. So these are the risk factors. And now let me show you real quick the protective factors. So again, we have the brain in the middle, and we see these things that can then help the brain, such as exercise, nutrition, unwind, meaning hopefully finding ways to cope with stress and other things that can help, that can make us more alter our mental state. Restoration, like sleep and rest, optimization of our brain, maybe having to do with continual learning and purpose-driven activities. What you see right here in the perimeter, again, are lifestyle habits. So these are things that are well under our control. These are things that we can incorporate into our lifestyle. Interesting things such as daylight exposure. So that has to do with our circadian rhythm, our rhythm of day and night. And this has to do not only with preventing Alzheimer's, but honestly with just mental health in general, because we are controlled by these bio clocks, so to speak, these biological clocks in our body. And if we're constantly altering our circadian rhythm and staying up too late and not getting enough daylight exposure, we're altering our circadian rhythm negatively. So plant-based diet again, so the more plants we eat, the more of these nutrients we're going to talk about in a minute, the better our brain works. Of course, getting enough sleep. But things such as meditation and stress management, of course, exercise. I will mention that in a little bit when I talk about the mood disorders. But you see all these things in the outer perimeter here. These are all things that have to do with lifestyle and that help to protect our brain. Last thing I want to mention before I move on to the mood disorders is something just very interesting. I find it very interesting because in this study, they say Alzheimer's disease. I hope you're reading the title. Alzheimer's disease is type 3 diabetes. And that might sound like something completely new to you. You might have never heard about this. I talk about this when I talk about diabetes, so in a completely different context. But what we see when we read a little bit more of the details is that the root cause for diabetes, called insulin resistance, I don't know if you can see it right here, it's been mentioned, insulin resistance, can also happen in the brain. Do you see right here, it says type 2 diabetes causes brain insulin resistance. In other words, the same risk factors that lead to diabetes type 2 may also contribute to Alzheimer's disease. So again, we see the connection between what possibly has to do with our diet and lifestyle. In the case of type 2 diabetes, we know very well there's risk factors associated with diet. And yet this could affect our brain as well. So our body and our brain, the brain is part of our body. Of course, they're connected. So it's very easy to see how nutrition is very important for the health of our brain. Okay, having said all of that, I want to move to the main part of this presentation. And I'm going to talk about two mood disorders that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. Mood disorders that are maybe the most common and most prevalent. Unfortunately, since 2020 with the pandemic, have become even more of an issue with the pandemic, as you probably already know. But I'm going to talk about both depression and anxiety and how some of our dietary factors can adversely affect our risk for these two things, or positively help our body and our brain. So I'm going to mention a few nutrients. Okay, so I'm going to, as I said before, I'm going to start off kind of with the bad news and then move on to the good news. So I'm just going to mention a lot of different nutrients and the evidence of what effects they can have on our brain, and especially these two mood disorders. So I'm going to start off with fats. Okay, so this might be good or bad news depending on what kind of diet you eat. You probably heard of the concept of good carbs and bad carbs. Same thing with fats. We can think of good fats and bad fats, or maybe good fats that when they're consumed in excess, they become bad fats. That's what I'm going to mention first. So I want to show you a study from the Journal of Affective Disorders. And this one is talking about 2 omega-6 fatty acids. Now, this might sound familiar to you, omega-6, or maybe you have heard of omega-3. So omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids are considered essential. Essential fatty acids are, or anything that's essential, is something that we cannot make ourselves. We have to obtain it from the diet, and we absolutely need it. And omega-6 fatty acids are indeed essential, so we have to have them. But here's the thing. We consume way too much omega-6 fatty acids and way too little of omega-3 fatty acids. Now, there's also another difference between these two, and it is that omega-6 fatty acids tend to be pro-inflammatory, whereas omega-3 fatty acids tend to be anti-inflammatory. Now, you're probably thinking now, oh, then omega-6 are bad because they're pro-inflammatory. But that's not necessarily the case, because we do need a little tiny bit of inflammation in our bodies. Just think about this. If you cut your finger, there's going to be an inflammatory response in your finger to heal that cut. So when it gets a little red, there's a mechanism of healing already getting triggered. As soon as you cut your finger, there's a mechanism that has to do with inflammation in order to heal that cut. So a little bit of inflammation is actually necessary. So omega-6 fatty acids are necessary, but in smaller amounts that we tend to consume it in the modern diet. Now, there's 2 particular omega-6 fatty acids. Again, these tend to be pro-inflammatory. We need omega-6 fatty acid in small amounts. We tend to eat 20 times as much omega-6 as omega-3, which is too much, and we don't get enough omega-3. Now, the two omega-6 fatty acids that I'm going to mention, or that are mentioned in this article, one is called arachidonic acid, and that's the AA is the abbreviation for arachidonic acid. And the second one is adrenic acid, right here, ADA, that's the abbreviation. And in this particular study, which was done in Brazil, actually, they found that high levels of these two omega-6 fatty acids were associated with a greater likelihood of, number one, suicide risk. So SR stands for suicide risk. And number two, major depression, MDE, in early pregnancy. So this study was done with pregnant women. We can possibly generalize it to the rest of the population. There's been more studies that have had similar results. So we can probably assume that this is generalizable to the rest of the population. But it's important to know what the sources of omega-6 fatty acids. For the most part, omega-6 fatty acids are found in vegetable oils, such as soybean and corn oil, sunflower oil, but also in some animal foods as well. So some animal foods that are good sources of arachidonic and adrenic acid are things such as chicken and eggs. Now, let me just mention briefly that omega-3 fatty acids have found to have the opposite effect. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but let me just show you real quick. You probably have heard of different sources of omega-3, right? I hope all of you have at least heard of omega-3 fatty acids. As I said before, the problem with the modern diet, if you will, quote unquote modern diet or Western diet, is that we get too little of omega-3 fatty acids. They're a little bit harder to find, whereas we get too much of the omega-6 fatty acids. Again, these are essential, or even omega-6 are, but not in the quantities we're getting them currently. So we tend to have too much of one kind, which is the pro-inflammatory, and then we see then this sort of inflammation issues everywhere, and a lot of individuals are dealing with inflammatory diseases nowadays. Now, there are several sources of omega-3 fatty acids, as you probably know. These tend to fight depression. I particularly like the vegetable sources of omega-3 fatty acids, although fish is a more concentrated source of omega-3 fatty acids, and they come in long chains as opposed to shorter chains that you find in the plant sources such as chia and omega. By the way, the two best sources in the plant kingdom for omega-3 are chia seeds and flax seeds, which I recommend that if people are going to use these as their source of omega-3, that they grind them. Because if you eat them whole, you're not going to absorb as much of the omega-3. So you grind them into powder and consume 1 to 2 tablespoons. And our body is very well equipped to transform these shorter chain omega-3 fatty acids to longer chain, like what you would find, for instance, in fish. The issue with fish is a great source of protein. The only issue is that it is also a very good source of contaminants. Unfortunately, again, one of the consequences of living in the 21st century is that we're exposed to a lot of chemicals. A lot of these chemicals and waste products end up in the ocean and in lakes and rivers, and the fish tend to absorb them, and there's a biomagnification effect that may basically result in bigger fish having more accumulation of some of these chemicals. Some of them are called forever chemicals because they don't degrade very well over time. So, and also the issue of microplastics nowadays is another source of concern. So I tend to favor, and also because I'm a plant-based, nutritionist, I tend to favor the plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids. But we can talk about that if you have any questions regarding that. I just wanted to show you some of the research or the literature on the effects of omega-3. So omega-3 fatty acids in the treatment of depression. And right here, as you can see highlighted, I'll read real quick what it says. It says there are a number of studies that shows that omega-3 fatty acids are proving to be very effective against the treatment of major depression disorder and other psychiatric disorders. So I would definitely include that in my diet daily. I tell people with inflammatory diseases to eat good sources of omega-3 fatty acids daily. This is something that I recommend people get daily. I personally recommend people get at least a tablespoon or two of either chia, flax, hemp. Hemp seeds are another good source. Walnuts are a good source. Soy fruits are a good source. But the most concentrated are flax and chia seeds. Here's another one. Association of use of omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids with changes in severity of anxiety symptoms. Right here, you see at the bottom, it says conclusion and relevance. This review indicates that omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids might help reduce the symptoms of clinical anxiety. Further well-designed studies are needed in populations whom the anxiety is the main symptom. So yes, so there's definitely some indication that it could help. So I just recommend everybody should get these fatty acids in their diet because they are essential, okay? Now, going back to the two that we had mentioned before, specifically one of them, I'm gonna go back to the bad news real quick. Speaking of the arachidonic acid, oops, I went too far. Okay, no, one more, here it is. Arachidonic acid, again, is one of those two pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids. It's mentioning right here how oxidation of arachidonic acids produces pro-inflammatory prostaglandins. These are just inflammatory molecules. But what we can see basically is the main point of this article is inflammation in the brain. So a consumption or excess consumption of arachidonic acid can lead to inflammation in the brain. And so we definitely want to stay away from excess consumption of this omega-6 fatty acids, and the main sources, as I said before, are chicken and eggs. Even though we think of these foods as extremely healthy, we forget that they have the fats that are in the animal products aren't necessarily the healthiest. So we need to keep them to a minimum, actually, if possible. In fact, they did a study where they restricted the consumption of meat, fish, and poultry in people who are omnivores. So these are not vegetarians necessarily, but they restricted these foods just a short amount of time. In fact, this is only 2 weeks. And what they found is that the diets were initially high, as you can see right here, high in arachidonic acids for these individuals compared to a vegetarian diet. For instance, a plant-based diet tends to be much lower in this pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids. So what they did is that they just basically restricted the intake of these meat or animal sources of arachidonic acid. And here's a table from this study. And what they found right here with arachidonic acid is that it failed the fastest or largest margin in the vegetarian. So when you restrict it completely, the vegetarian group saw the biggest drop in just 2 weeks of arachidonic acid. So it could be decreased in your body, basically, which is shifting into a more plant-based diet. Here's another interesting study. This is a multi-center, in other words, in multiple places and multiple locations. There were 292 participants, so it's not necessarily a small very small study. And it's randomized controlled trial. This is the kind of study that most scientists think is the highest level of evidence. And this was a nutrition intervention program in a multi-ethnic adult population, corporate setting. And the nutrition intervention basically was a plant-based diet. So it's a plant-based nutrition intervention. And what they found is that this kind of diet actually reduces depression and anxiety. So let's think in terms more of more plants and less animals if we want to see that reduction in risk for both depression and anxiety. Now, why would plant foods have that kind of effect? Why would a plant-based diet have this kind of effect of reduction in depression and anxiety? Well, a lot of people think it's because of the antioxidants that are found in plant foods. So do you see right here, if you're looking at the screen, you probably see a lot of colors. So you probably see a lot of very bright colors. And we as humans tend to be attracted to bright colors. So the greens, the reds, the orange, the yellow, the purple, that is actually no purple foods here on the screen, but you can think of blueberries and eggplants and red grapes, these dark colors as well. All of these indicate pigments. And pigments in plants are actually the antioxidants. And they have incredible good positive effects in our body. So let me show you some of the evidence for that. Here's a study that talks about antioxidant status and how it could be related to depressive symptoms in US adults. And what they found is that the more antioxidants a person had, that was associated with reduction of depressive symptoms. So more antioxidants, in this case, they studied carotenoids, which are those antioxidants that are found in green leafy vegetables and of course, carrots. So these kinds of antioxidants were found to have a reduction in depressive symptoms. And so the next thought many people have is that I'm gonna run to CVS and buy myself a bottle of antioxidants. You could technically get supplements of antioxidants, but interestingly enough, what they found is that they're not as effective. Antioxidants are effective when they come from food, but not so much when it comes from dietary supplements. So here, what it says right here at the bottom, I'm just giving you the summary of these things. If we had the time to go through each study, I would, but it just takes a lot of time. So I'm just giving you the bottom line. And literally the bottom line right here says, these findings point to the importance of antioxidant food sources rather than dietary supplements. In other words, what we have found is that we don't understand the complexity of nutrition yet to the point where we can imitate what nature does. So when nature puts these antioxidants in food, it puts them in the right combination with other nutrients that act synergistically, and we don't understand those things enough to be able to imitate them in a supplement. Supplements, you can get maybe isolated nutrients, sometimes in combination, but in foods, they're found in perfect combinations with the perfect percentages, I guess, and the synergy with other nutrients. And they're just found to be more effective. So I definitely recommend people eat a better diet, because taking supplements is never a good substitute for eating a healthy diet. Sometimes supplements are helpful, but they shouldn't be a substitute for a healthy diet that has these antioxidants. So when we think of antioxidants, what we want to include in our diet, as I said before, all these colors, so the fruits and the vegetables and multicolors, but not just fruits and vegetables. So I'm going to talk about a few more important nutrients that are found in other types of food. For instance, let me mention real quick, folic acid. You might have heard of folic acid before. Women tend to be, especially pregnant women, tend to be told that they need to consume enough folic acid to prevent malformations in the fetus. But lack of folic acid can also affect brain function, and it could be a risk factor for depression. So let me show you real quick a study that says that use of folic acid can be used for depression and anxiety, and a folate deficiency may be the cause. It may be linked in depressive symptoms. So we definitely want to make sure that we don't have a deficiency of folic acid. Now, if you want to get it from food, this is the kind of foods that I recommend. You probably saw the pictures already, and you might already know this, that green vegetables, particularly green leafy vegetables, are a great source of folic acid. Not only are they a great source of folic acid, they're a great source of multiple other nutrients. So all kinds of antioxidants and minerals and vitamins. In fact, green leafy vegetables are the most nutrient-dense foods you can eat. That is, they're the highest in nutrient density. Nutrient density is the amount of nutrients per unit, whether it's unit of weight or calorie. Either way you measure it, they're the most nutrient dense. I think people should eat green leafy vegetables absolutely every day. I'm hoping that you are motivated to include your veggies every day, and hopefully at least one portion of green vegetables every day, because they are the most nutrient dense foods we can eat. Now, having said that, there's other foods, as I said, that are above and beyond just your fruits and veggies. Legumes, so your beans, your lentils, are great sources of folic acid and other things such as fiber and many, many, many other things. But in the context of folic acid, these are great sources. So in other words, you might not need to take a supplement as long as you include these foods on a daily basis. Why not? They're actually great foods. Okay, another thing that I want to mention that has to do with risk for mental health or mental health issues. You might have heard before of this amino acid. So this is not an antioxidant, this is not a vitamin, this is not a mineral. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. So now we're thinking of in terms of proteins. And amino acids are their building blocks. So think about a chain. Each amino acid is a link in the chain. So amino acids are little portions of proteins. And I don't know if you've ever heard of tryptophan before. Tryptophan is one of the essential amino acids. But here's the thing, okay? Tryptophan, I don't know if you've heard this. You might not have heard about this, but I think this is important to know. It's an amino acid that is actually converted to serotonin. Serotonin. And if you know anything about depression and what antidepressants do, antidepressant medications do, you might have heard of serotonin, because a lot of the most common antidepressants are considered serotonin reuptake inhibitors, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. So they work on the serotonin levels in the brain. Well, this amino acid gets converted into serotonin. So should we eat more of it? I think so, because there's some evidence that consuming more tryptophan actually does help to fight depression and anxiety. It helps. I'm not saying it takes the place of antidepressants, but it sure helps. So I think we should optimize our diet as much as possible. So here, for those of you who like chemistry, here are the steps. From tryptophan, then it gets converted to a molecule called 5-HTP, and that gets converted to serotonin. And as I said before, serotonin has to do with how antidepressants work in our brain. And what antidepressants do is they increase the amount of serotonin. Right here in this drawing, the little red ball or orange balls you see right here, little circles you see right here, are representing serotonin. And what the antidepressants do is that they increase the amount of serotonin in what's called the synapse, which is the space between two neurons. So that synapse is where the serotonin is increased. And but basically what the SSRIs do is that they block the reuptake. In other words, it increases the amount of serotonin in the brain. So that's what happens. That's what antidepressants do. Now, as I said before, tryptophan could be a precursor for serotonin. So I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but there's foods that have tryptophan. And a lot of people think of tryptophan in terms of Thanksgiving. I don't know if you've heard this before, but a lot of people are like, yeah, turkey and milk can help you feel better, sleep better at night. So eat these things before going to bed. So these are some of the foods that are commonly, oops, I went too far again. Let me go back real quick. Sometimes my computer is pretty slow. Here we go. Here are some of the foods that sometimes we think of as good sources of tryptophan. But there's one thing that I want to mention tonight that I think is important to know when it comes to tryptophan, and it's the following. Tryptophan is an amino acid, and it's particularly important because it's actually hard to absorb into the brain because it competes. So hear me out. It competes. Tryptophan competes with other amino acids for absorption into the brain, especially. So it's not like you can just eat a piece of chicken and the tryptophan's gonna like go right into your brain. It doesn't work that way. Because the chicken, for instance, has a lot of protein. It's a high protein food, as you probably know. And the fact that it has a lot of protein means it has a lot of competing amino acids. Competing amino acids. Therefore, when we eat a high protein diet, what happens is that the tryptophan levels in the brain actually go down. So let me show you this study that actually talks about that. And it basically shows that when you eat a high protein diet, the tryptophan levels go down. Whereas when you eat more carbohydrates, the tryptophan levels go up. Number one, because you have less competing amino acids. And number two, because it releases insulin, and insulin helps to absorb more of that tryptophan. So now you're probably thinking, wait a minute, I thought high carbohydrates are bad. So again, we're thinking in terms of good carbs and bad carbs. There's definitely carbohydrate foods that are extremely healthy. So when we say carbohydrates, I don't mean Coke or Pepsi. I don't mean chocolate cookies. I don't mean as much as chocolate cake. They're delicious. These are delicious things, but they're not helpful. They're not healthy for our body. So high carbohydrate can technically mean anything. I tend to recommend carbohydrate foods that are good for you, for all of your body. And here's another study that has shown something similar. So it talks about carbohydrate-rich, protein-poor foods and how these foods actually tend to improve or actually prevent deterioration of mood and cognitive performance. So when we eat a low-carb diet, that might actually impair our cognitive performance, and it actually might have a negative effect on our mood. In fact, a lot of people who go on low-carb diets, one of the side effects of low-carb diets is irritability and basically a deterioration of mood. It might even make some individuals, maybe not everybody, but some individuals more susceptible to depression and other mood disorders. Especially stress susceptible individuals were found to be more affected when they consume a low carb diet. It might have more of a negative effect on those people. Here's another study that confirms something similar. It talks about the competing amino acids. These are called large neutral amino acids. These are the amino acids that compete for absorption, as I said, and how when we eat more carbs, again, I tend to recommend good carbs, fruits, whole grains, things like that, like yams, squash, vegetables. These things are healthy and have good carbs that can help then to improve the ratio of tryptophan to large neutral amino acids in the brain, therefore increasing serotonin in the brain. Here's another study that shows something similar, how carbohydrates improve measures for depression, tension, anger, confusion, etc. So this was done with premenstrual depression, and they found the same thing. And of course, you might intuitively know this, because if you eat a piece of chocolate, you feel so much better. But we don't want to concentrate on the chocolate that has all the fat and the sugar and all these other things, and tends to be maybe even addictive. We want to concentrate on the good sources of carbohydrates that can have a similar effect without some of the more, eat a small piece of chocolate is probably okay, but we don't want to go overboard. So my personal recommendation, based on all this evidence, is to avoid low carb diets. Try to incorporate healthy carbohydrates. And if you need to lose weight, I would, especially if you have susceptibility to mood disorders, I would try different ways of losing weight, with healthy. Of course, I'm a plant-based nutritionist, so I definitely recommend whole food plant-based diet that can achieve that long-term weight loss for some individuals, with good side effects for their cardiovascular health and their reversing of type 2 diabetes and help to, prevent cancer and Alzheimer's and all these other things. So that's my recommendation. But also there's been some evidence, like, for instance, this one talks about low carb diets compared to low fat diet and the effects on mood and cognitive function. And this study was a year. So they took two groups, one with a low fat diet, one with a low carb diet. And over a year, there was a favorable, so I'm reading right here, the part that I highlighted. It says over 1 year, there was a favorable effect of an energy restricted low fat diet compared to the same kind of calories in a low carb diet. That's what isocaloric means. It's the same calories, but one is LF is low fat, one is LC low carbs. So the LF, the low fat diet, had a favorable effect compared to the low carb diet on mood state and effect, in affect in overweight and obese individuals. So the effect on mood was more positive on a low fat diet rather than a low carb diet. Now, I personally recommend people eat foods that actually have to have tryptophan without the other competing amino acids. So I want to show you a few foods that are found to be high in tryptophan without the other competing amino acids. So these tend to be plant foods because they don't have so many of the other amino acids. Like animal foods tend to have a lot of protein and therefore a lot of competing amino acids. Whereas these foods tend to have high ratio of tryptophan alone without the other amino acids. For instance, tofu, pumpkin seeds. These are almonds, as you know, and these are sesame seeds. These are just examples of foods that have a good effect on tryptophan because they are high. They have a higher ratio of tryptophan to other amino acids. Of course, now speaking more generally, we do want to avoid a unhealthy diet in general, especially one that might be high in saturated fat, like we mentioned before. Saturated fat can affect your cardiovascular system and your brain as well, because your brain is connected to your vessels. There's vessels that go into the brain. So a high fat diet, particularly junk food, is of course very unhealthy, as everybody knows. But high foods in particular impair proper circulation and maybe a risk factor for depression. So let me show you one study that talks exactly about one of the possible mechanisms by which a high fat diet may promote depression-like behavior. This was done in mice, but some of it has been replicated in humans. But this one in mice, they did it in mice because they were trying to figure out the mechanisms. And what they found is that it impairs the function of the hypothalamus, which is part of your brain that has to do with memory and other things that are important. And this might be the causal mechanism by which a high fat diet can then put us at a higher risk for depression. Here's another study that talks about fatty acids and brain inflammation. I don't know if you remember, I mentioned brain inflammation at the beginning, how that the omega-6 fatty acids were possibly increasing brain inflammation. This one talks about same thing, talks about omega-6 fatty acids and that neuroinflammation that may have, so excess omega-6 fatty acids, and that neuroinflammation and possible links to mood disorders, neuropsychiatric. I don't know if you could see, I didn't highlight it this time, but right here talking about neuropsychiatric disorders, and it's talk about how the fatty acids can have a direct effect on this inflammatory process in the brain. So let me tell you real quick about this lady. This lady, I heard her story and I thought it was very interesting, because she, first of all, she started dieting when she was 9. She'd been dieting her whole life. She'd been overweight her whole life. By the age of 55, she felt that she was at the end of her rope, because not only was she fighting overweight and obesity her whole life, but also lifelong depression, which had gone from bad to worse all of a sudden at the age of 55. And she said her feet and her knees were aching all the time. She's only 4'11" and she weighed 220 pounds. That's the BMI of 44. So she was definitely struggling with weight as well. So the first thing that she found out was about mindful eating. So that's the first thing she tried. She started paying more attention to her food and her thoughts and feelings as she was eating. And she was able to understand what was driving her to overeat. That was not a quick process. It took years, a couple of years to figure that out. But then she watched one of those documentaries about plant-based eating, and something clicked in her brain. So she was already vegetarian, so to speak, like ovo-lacto-vegetarian, meaning she was still eating some dairy products. And she figured out that she couldn't eat these things in moderation. Now once she watched that, she started to understand that she was a little bit addicted to some of these foods. And so she was eating like cheese in large amounts every day. So she thought, okay, I'm going to do a 2-week experiment. I'm just going to try to not eat these foods for 2 weeks. Because she had heard about this connection between inflammation and depression. She stumbled upon some videos online. She rewatched the documentary. By the way, the name of the documentary is Forks Over Nights. You might have seen it already. And so these dots started to connect for her. She realized that dairy might have been a contributor to her depression. And so she decided to basically try to not eat it for 2 weeks. She thought, okay, anybody can do it for 2 weeks. And it could be done. So she tried it, and immediately she felt better. In fact, she lost 7 pounds in only 2 weeks, and she felt so much better at the end of the 2 weeks that she was like, okay, I'm going to extend it a little bit because I'm really liking the effects of this. So she thought, okay, I'm going to do it for another month. So she kept going. She kept losing weight, and she decided that she was going to do it for 6 months, because at the end of the month, she was like feeling so much better. But the thing is, after about 6 months, her cravings came back. She really wanted pizza. She wanted cheese. She just had this like addictive personality. She wanted ice cream. And she had these cravings that she just couldn't get easily distracted from. They were insane. They were relentless. And it's the kind of withdrawal symptoms that she felt she was going through. It's almost like cheese was a drug for her. But she kept going. She kept watching documentaries and tried to motivate herself. And at least once a week, she was watching them to just kind of keep going and keep motivated. And eventually, she made other changes, eating more vegetables, more than she'd had ever done in her whole life. She cut some of the salt, the oil. She started exercising more. And now, of course, the image on the right is her. Now, after 5 years, she's lost 90 pounds. Her lifelong depression basically lifted because also not only was she eating healthier, she also had a more active lifestyle. She was running 10Ks, 5Ks, but she had to switch to biking because of her knees. But basically, she had a healthier lifestyle, and that helped so much, not only in her body, but her mental health. So I just wanted to give you that as one story of somebody who definitely benefited from a smart nutrition, brain healthy nutrition. And so to end, I just want to quickly mention other factors that are above and beyond just nutrition. These are the lifestyle factors that have to do also with prevention of Alzheimer's. If you remember that circle at the beginning, and those lifestyle habits that then had the impact on these factors that then affect the brain. So we know, for instance, sleeping is extremely important. I mentioned that circadian rhythm before. Our bodies are meant to follow and be in harmony with that day and night cycle. And when we stay up too late, especially when we are exposed to these blue lights you might have heard of from your phone, from your computer, from your TV, these lights have the effect of sending a message to our brain that's still daylight, and therefore we have a harder time sleeping at night. But lack of sleep has been directly associated with developing anxiety and depression. So I think it's super important for people who have sleep issues to consult with a sleep professional, look up sleep hygiene, and try to incorporate those lifestyle habits that helped you to sleep better at night. Even exercise help you to sleep better at night. A little bit of sunlight in the morning has found to set the timer in your brain for releasing melatonin at night, 16 hours later. So if you get that early light exposure, as soon as you wake up, try to go outside for even 5 minutes, even if you're going to go to an office or school later, but at least get those 5 minutes outside, because that gets your brain going. It starts that timer. And at 16 hours later, you'll be producing more melatonin. So it's very important to obey that cycle. And regular exercise, reduce stress. I mean, that's easier said than done, all these things, of course. Again, exercise, how important, physical activity. This is from NIH. Can't get any more formal than that. The NIH says physical activity may reduce depression symptoms. It's talking about not getting enough physical activity can increase your risk for not only diabetes, heart disease, cancers, but also mental health disorders. So you can consider lack of exercise a risk factor for mental health disorders. So current theories about depression suggest that sleep problems, as I just mentioned, lack of energy, lack of physical inactivity can result in depressed mood. I want to show you another study that I just saw like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I actually posted on my Facebook page, because this is very, very recent. This is from 2023. This is a study done in Australia, where they actually, as you can see from the title, they studied the effectiveness of physical activity interventions. So this is not just a recommendation, just go do some RX. This is an intervention. When they do intervention, they actually measure the effects. So this was a physical activity intervention for improving depression, anxiety, and distress. And I'm gonna show you real quick, I'm gonna jump to the conclusion and relevance. And you can see right here, physical activity is highly beneficial for improving symptoms of depression, anxiety, and distress across a wide range of adult populations, including general population, people diagnosed with mental health disorders, and people with chronic disease. Physical activity should be a mainstay. I think that's one of the differences between this study and previous studies on the effects of exercise on mental health. These researchers are saying this should be a mainstay. This should be the first approach. This is one of the first line approaches for mental health. Exercise should be like the #1 recommendation at this point in the management of depression, anxiety, and psychological distress. And so what they found, if you really want to read more, take a screenshot or whatever, look it up later. But what they're talking about is one of the big reasons why exercise is so important for mental health is because there's a substance called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, also known as BDNF, which is a key molecule that is involved in plastic changes related to learning and memory. And it promotes the creation and maturation of new brain cells and synapses. It's almost like a miracle grow for the brain. And what exercise does is that it stimulates more BDNF in your brain. And it's so important that the University of Australia, these researchers basically deemed exercise to be the main treatment for mental health issues, stating that it's 1.5 times more effective than current medications. That's how important exercise is. So I definitely recommend make the time, because it's medicine. It's medicine for your body, and it's free. All you have to pay for is, you know, a good pair of tennis shoes or something. Other than that, it's just making the time. But it has so many benefits in so many other aspects of life. The only side effects are beneficial, so why not? Okay, the other one is bright light therapy. As you might know, during the winter times, people, in fact, me, I tend to have a little, we used to anyway, have more depressive symptoms in the winter. That's called seasonal affective disorder, as you might know. And so during the summer, we want to expose ourselves to that bright light, natural bright light, but in the winter it's a little bit more difficult, especially higher latitudes. People who live in Canada, Northern Europe, or whatever, what they do is that they use these boxes. I don't know if you've ever heard of these light boxes to combat depression in the winter. I definitely have used it in the past. I highly recommend it. So these are, again, these are lifestyle things that we can incorporate into our life aside from the nutrition. So the nutrition, I definitely recommend a plant-based nutrition, low in saturated fats, low in those omega-6, or not low, but not as high in those pro-inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids, and higher in omega-3, higher in antioxidants and vitamins and minerals. So the more plants you incorporate into your diet, the better. And let me just end describing a little bit what we do in our program. Again, it's sponsored by Santa Cruz County. And we put people on a 10-day immersion program, and we give them recipes. We give them support for 10 days, and they change their diet only for 10 days. We try to make it not super intimidating, so people don't think that they have to change their diet forever. But we do this to help people with their diabetes, their, you know, heart disease, whatever else. And what we have found is that it's highly effective for all these things, but people also feel better. So this is one way to help with mental health and physical health. Let me just show you real quick some of the effects we've had, because we don't have a way to really measure mental health. We're not doing that in the moment. I think there are ways that could be achieved as well. I think it's been done through certain questionnaires and stuff. But just to show you some of the physical biometrics that we have been measuring, like cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, triglycerides. So these are your lipids, and we saw how lipids can indeed affect the brain, because it's one of those risk factors that then affect the brain. In fact, we know, for instance, glucose is very much related to the risk for the brain, you know, because it could cause insulin resistance in the brain, both the lipids and the fats. So all of these things, when we control them, not only our physical health improves, but also our mental health, just because our brain is healthier. So we also measure people's BMI and blood pressure, and all of these things improve. As you can see, these are just the averages. We have amazing results. Some individuals improve much more than this. Some individuals don't follow as much. Unfortunately, they don't see great results. We don't force anybody. We don't have no control of what people eat or don't eat. So they choose what to eat. And the ones who eat a healthier diet, more plants, less fats, you know, less sugar, less processed foods, they just see better results. So if you want to learn a little bit more about our program, you can definitely visit us. Our website is eatfortheearth.org. And if you want to know what our program is all about, it's Community RX. You can drive over. We have the programs. You more welcome. It's not only for Santa Cruz residents. So if you want to drive over the hill and come visit us when we do our next program, fill up our interest form in our website web page, and then you can come. So you're more than welcome to come, even though it's a little bit of a drive. It's totally worth it, I think. So or if you just want to learn about, you know, how to eat more healthy, you can follow us on social media and stuff like that. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I want to thank you for your time. I hope this has been motivational, or at least informational. And if you have any questions, I'm more than willing to answer any questions you may have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maria. I think I just see a question here is, what is considered an excessive consumption of eggs and chicken on a regular diet?
That's a little bit difficult to define for every person, because every person has different caloric needs, different activity levels, different age, you know, even different height and weight. So it's hard to, you know, define it for everybody, you know, and just give one general amount for everybody because it probably won't apply. But I would think, so they've done different studies, like epidemiological studies, where they've compared people who eat animal foods on a daily basis. So that I would consider that like a heavy use if you're consuming them daily. But if you only use them like once or twice a week, that would be more of a semi-vegetarian diet, if you will. And you can see like a 25% reduction in both the risk for hypertension and something like 27% reduction in the risk for diabetes if you just go from like daily to a couple times a week. So immediately see an improvement. So I would say too much might be daily. But if you just shift to a couple times a week, you can see a dramatic effect in some of these biometrics. So it's worth it.
And I think there's another question here that is kind of continued with the same question, is that some of the fitness routines, such as strength training, recommend increasing protein intake to sustain the training demands, such as chicken, fish, and egg. How do you manage these demands versus eating to improve manage mental health?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And in fact, I myself, go to the gym. I go to the gym 4 times a week. I had an injury in my knees and tennis elbow. So I had tendonitis and meniscus. So I had to stop for like 2 years working out. So then going back from that, I had to like rebuild my muscle mass. And that was quite challenging. And so I kind of hired a coach, a vegan, because I'm myself vegan. So I hired a vegan fitness coach. And, he gave me basically, menus and stuff. And basically what you're doing is trying to you want to increase your protein intake. And there's very good sources of plant-based proteins. So I myself consume soy-based foods like tofu and tempeh. I consume legumes. I do use sometimes those powders also, but that are plant-based, and they tend to be sometimes a little bit less. But I try to look for the ones that are less processed. So it's like hemp protein, things like that you can get, or pea protein. So those are, some of the sources you can use. I tend to like them. And I've definitely rebuilt, my body composition improved quite dramatically doing that. And so I can definitely tell you that, oh, by the way, you can actually look up, like if you Google vegan bodybuilders or whatever, there's a bunch of websites of men and women who are bodybuilders professionally then who do it completely on a plant-based diet. So there's definitely ways to do it. There's basically ways to do it for sure.
I know there are sports people also who are completely plant-based. I'm myself 90% vegan. I do consume a little bit of dairy because there are certain things I really enjoy, and I have seen myself in my body that certain food causes inflammation, and I get a lot of aches and pains. And then when you stop consuming that, it stops. But what I wanted to ask you is that you mentioned consuming excess soy. Does soy interrupt with hormonal imbalances? Because then that can also impact mental health.
Yes, that's a great question. Because there's a lot of information, social media, YouTube, there's just like so much information. You're like, how do you decipher? Like, how do you know what's true, what's not true? And with regards to soy, there's a lot of stuff out there. But the good news is that some researchers really took upon this question a couple of years ago. I think it was 2021 when they published what's called a meta-analysis. So it's like usually a meta-analysis includes like 10 studies, 20 studies. This will include like 417 studies, which is the biggest study like that I've ever seen. It's 60 pages long. If you read it, it's humongous. So they really, really dug into the literature to answer all these questions. A lot of people have questions about, wait, doesn't soy cause cancer? Doesn't soy alter your thyroid? And like the person who asked about hormone balance, especially men, women, teenagers, all these different things. And they went question by question by question, looked up all the available good quality research, because there's, sometimes research is not that great. So they looked up, they try to look for the good studies. And what they found is that there's no association between soy consumption and alteration in the hormonal balance in men or teenagers. So there's pseudoestrogen, if you will, or plant-based estrogen in some soy, not just soy foods, other foods, but soy in particular. But what these plant phytoestrogens do is that they actually modulate estrogen. So for women who are going through menopause, who are kind of suffering from kind of lack of estrogen because their hormones are going down, it actually helps to improve their symptoms, perimenopausal symptoms, because it helps to kind of bring back up, if you will. But for people who have excess of estrogen or other hormones, it actually helps to modulate it. So it has a beneficial effect, in other words. And in men, they've done a few studies where they have found that men who consume like 1 cup, I think it was 1 or 2 cups of soy milk a day, has something like 70% less risk for prostate cancer. And I've seen at least 2 studies where they've shown men who consume soy foods tend to have less prostate cancer. Also, if you look at Netflix, there's a new series called Live to 100.
Yes, I've watched that.
Oh yeah, it's
The
about
one in Okinawa, they consume a lot of soy. Yes.
in Loma Linda, California. They probably are the biggest
The
consumers
vegans.
of soy foods in the country.
Yeah.
And they live 10 years longer than everybody else. And also they don't have any of these hormonal issues. So yeah, and so there's a study, a very good, if people really want to dig into the evidence for this, there's very good sources of information to kind of debunk some of these more sort of myths out there on the, and basically people who eat soy actually live long, and they have no problem with their hormonal balance or anything like that.
There's a question that I have actually, is I know you talked about the circadian rhythm and you talked about light therapy. What research is out there, if you're aware of, about red light therapy?
About red light therapy?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've heard a little bit lately. I've been just barely starting to find out more about this. I've heard it in the context of infrared light and how it affects our body. And is that what you have heard as well?
That's the one. That's correct.
I have heard a lot of good things. It improves your immune response. So I'm still digging into the available information on this. So I'm not super aware like of the exact details. What I've heard is that, so being exposed to infrared energy, whether it comes from so you can be outside and get the sunlight, and you get a little bit of the UV rays on your skin, and that will produce the vitamin D. But you don't want excess of UV rays on your skin, because excess UV rays will then have a negative effect. So there's a lot of things where you want to hit that sweet spot, not too little, not too much. And sunlight's one of those. But even if you're wearing long sleeves and a hat or whatever, you're still getting the warmth. That's infrared radiation from the sun. And that has very good effects on your immune system, as far as I'm concerned, and maybe other aspects that I don't remember at this moment. But yes, it does have good. And when you're out in nature, it just so happens that plants tend to reflect it back to you. So go out in nature is a really good thing to do.
Yeah, that's why the Japanese follow the forest walks, right?
Yes, yes, I've heard the same things.
Yeah. Okay, just checking. I don't see any other questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. Anyone else have a questions? I think we're way past our time. We can see if anyone else has a question. Doesn't look like it. I don't see any hands raised. Oh, I do see something. What is the best go-to resource to find a list of good carbs, omega-3 foods with antioxidants, foods with that have good choices?
That's a great question. So I have a lot of sources that I like to. I'm certified in plant-based nutrition, so I love the Center for Nutrition Studies. It's called Center for Nutrition Studies. This is from Cornell University. It's called actually T. Colin Campbell. So that's the name of the researcher who started it. So T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. If you just Google Center for Nutrition Studies, you'll probably get the webpage, and then they have recipes, they have articles, a lot of good stuff. The other source that I particularly like is another website called nutritionfacts.org, nutritionfacts.org. facts.org. And that's from Dr. Michael Greger. He's also a plant-based proponent, and he has very good books and cookbooks. And he just has very like a library of short videos. So any particular subject that you're interested in, you can just do a search, and then you can find all kinds of stuff about anything that you're looking, especially when it comes to health and nutrition. And the third good source that I recommend is Forks Over Nights. So that's the documentary that lady that I talked to you about. That's the one documentary. It's kind of like an older documentary, but it's like a classic. And so they have a website though that's full of testimonials as well as recipes. And I really like their recipes. So cookbook, so it's good resources for healthy eating. And if you're interested, like plant curious, just incorporate more plant-based recipes into your life, even like once a week, twice a week. You can build on from there. Just try new things. I think that's a good approach for people who are kind of new at this, and they might be a little bit scared, and maybe they don't want to jump into like being vegan or something. You don't have to be vegan as long as you consume a large percentage of your foods from plants that are not processed, because people are like, but Oreo cookies are vegan. Yeah, but Oreo cookies are not.
They're not the healthiest.
That's not necessarily what I mean. So or like the unprocessed, the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, the legumes,
That's right. And I just want to add that, there's one app that I personally use. It's called Healthy Living. It's the EWG Healthy Living app. And if you're grocery shopping, you can just scan the item and it tells you whether it has good ingredients in it. And it also has for other things that you can use, like cosmetics. So just 2 cents. Okay, there is one more question here. This is Your Brain on Food is a book someone recommended. Is that a good one?
I would have to look into it because I'm not sure. I can't recommend something I haven't read. So I don't know for sure. I don't know. I can't say for sure.
Okay. And then there's one comment here. They say that I started following an anti-inflammatory diet about 6 months ago, and I can see and feel an amazing difference. Not always easy to eat like this, but it makes a huge difference with pain and mood. Excellent presentation. Thank you. That's what I say. Okay, I think that's about it. Thank you so much, Maria. I think this was such an excellent presentation. We really, really enjoyed all the information that you shared with us and how food and nutrition affects mental health and our overall well-being. I think this is something that is helpful for each one of us. And really appreciate you taking the time. And I know you had to start a little later. I'm sorry about that. Really appreciate you coming in tonight, and thanks for everyone who stayed back this late. And it's almost 9 o'clock, so I'm going to follow what Maria mentioned, and you have to follow your circadian rhythm and go to sleep after this. So thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you again next month. Bye-bye.